Thank you. It's not a very good pen.
Yeah, no, it's the Seikaly.
Oh, another one. Yours?
مين العلاقة بيناتنا؟ مين العلاقة بيناتنا؟ مش متذكرة. بس أنا كأني بعرف وجهك بس مش قادرة
Thank you very much.
أوه يا حبيبة قلبي.
Hi. Hello.
Thank you. All that. And so excited to be here.
Thank you. أهلا.
Excited to be
I don't want to be.
here. Oh my God.
You can just put your name.
Yeah, just my name. I know.
I know we got to start. Should I give you after work?
Yeah, exactly.
I'll come back. Setting up a lending library at the church and these dogs.
Ah, okay. That's a very good idea.
كيفك ريم؟ شو جابك؟
أنا جاي. I registered the account and I'm gonna be on Wednesday too.
كمان أنا رح أروح بكرة ووينزداي. So I will see you.
I'll let you do your thing.
أوكي حبيبتي.
That's one. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, how are you? Good to see you.
Dr. May, did you ever get in touch with that Samra Mansour?
With whom؟
Uh,
وين أنت ما بتجاوبش على
that
Honey, nice meeting you.
the journalist that wanted to reach out to you?
You did send it. I had no time. I mean, it was a bad time. But I would love if they get in touch with me.
Okay.
They write me and tell me.
She said that she's been sending you emails.
شو اسمها؟
Sandra?
يا مسكينة حق I wasn't well. I wrote and told her, look, I have a heart problem.
Yeah, I know.
That sometimes I'm not
I'll let
happy.
her know.
Good to see you.
Okay, thank
See
you.
you Thursday morning.
Thank you.
Sure. Hello. You remember me? I'm trying to. It looks familiar. But I'm jet lagged, so I have an excuse.
I'm Karen.
Where did
We met in your house many years ago. Before you left.
Wow, even before I left.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about cats and this thing.
Ah, now it comes back to me.
How
Yeah,
are you?
I'm fine. Yeah, that was about 20 years ago.
It was. Yeah, it was some time ago. But we've met later in
Yeah.
Michigan.
Yeah, no, it comes back to me.
Coming back.
Yeah, 2010 I was here.
I
Yes,
love what we've been doing
thank you very much.
هاي المرة
and what we're suffering doing.
هاي صحيح.
Good to see you. Thank you. Yes, of course.
مرحبا سهير. كيفك؟
Good. You want you want a seat for him?
No هذا ابن عمتي.
Oh, okay.
No.
Does he have a seat?
في لك سيت ولا لا؟ وين السيت تبعك؟
Thank you very much. Thank you.
كارم ولا بتجاوب حتى على الميل؟
Nice meeting you.
بعثت لك عزمتك اليوم كان عندي جاليرينج لإلان.
My person, ابعتيلي على اليومين.
Please give her my love. Yeah.
كانت جاليرينج
Oh, that's very kind of her.
أنا بس على كل قلبي بوجع بشكر أول مرة جيت إلى
Give her my best regards. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
بقول لك قلبي شوي وجعني بس عم بستنى إنه اليوم يخلص حتى شوي أكل.
Thank you. Thank you. Very kind of you. Fine. Very good to
John
see you.
McPherson, pleasure to meet you.
Nice meeting you, John.
Is there any way to take a picture with you?
Of course, whenever.
Give me your blessing.
My blessings. That would be great.
Thank you.
We met a while back.
Did you enjoy it?
But,
Did you enjoy the meeting?
doing this to rub it in somebody's face. She lives in Buffalo.
Nothing you can do wrong. This is a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much
I
for
have my
everything.
pills for 8:30 in mind.
Thank you.
8:30.
Thank you
Might
so
be
much.
difficult. So, find a spot. I have the drinks so that I can have the serious medication to take.
Why don't you have it out there? Why don't you just
I
put
put
it
it
in
in
your
mine.
purse?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have your pills?
I have my pills and I have my rest. I'm okay.
Where do you want me to sit? So you can make it.
Sit anywhere you can.
Very
Very good place.
Can leave that there.
sound.
ظبط الميكروفون لانه
Okay. Ilan, ignore anything I say.
You've known each other for a very long time.
Yes, we do.
I knew
Very
him
nice
when
meeting you.
we were
Very nice meeting you,
at
sir.
university,
Thank you.
which
To
is
meet
in
your mother-in-law.
1972. But he is smarter than me, it's okay.
No,
You're going to sleep at University of Michigan in
Today
Texas
they're going to
Yeah, that's what I heard.
close it, so be careful. It seems there's lots of police
I've heard that,
going
yeah.
today. There's
Right.
police, and there's lots of police here.
yeah, we noticed on
They
the.
have a call out for people to go there, but we can't go because they have managed.
You
they can't
might
take management.
find like a lot of Jews.
Yeah, yeah.
But the Jewish voice for peace are very strong.
Yeah.
They're excellent.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Shouldn't be a religious thing. It should be really.
So we're gonna start with you, correct?
Ooh.
Yeah, just not gonna move the microphone because we're gonna start with you.
Yeah. بعدين we give it.
Yeah.
فأنا بس بدي أقدمه.
Yes.
She's the one. She's introducing you tomorrow.
She is. Okay.
Chris Boone introducing you tomorrow.
Sorry?
Chris Boone, she's introducing you tomorrow.
Ah, yes, I think so.
The Palestine Museum volunteer that she introduced everyone on the side.
Ah, okay, okay. So it's good enough.
You want him to sign? ولا يهمك.
Well,
Our friend.
nice meeting you.
This is our friend here.
Nice meeting you, sir. Good.
Did you get the books?
Thank you very much.
They have all his
No,
books.
it's not easy.
Ethnic cleansing is important. Ethnic cleansing.
Thank you.
عفوا يصورني ماجد معكم
بدك هاي؟
بدكم تصور معكم انا
تعال.
Thank you very much. Very nice meeting you, sir. Hello. Nice meeting you.
Very
Yes,
old
of course.
friends.
Yeah, we are friends.
Okay.
Thank you very
Listen.
much. That's great. You know all these people.
I have to talk here, don't I?
On both. That's for my
Both?
camera. That's for the.
This is the email you sent me, May 4th.
The man.
Please send it to Karim at UMesh. Don't send it to this email.
Okay. شو بدي أعرف؟ How would I know يعني؟
I'm the only one.
وسألت جريس قالت لي أوكي.
left it okay on this one. I don't check this.
خلاص I will على كل
I'll email you from my
yeah,
email.
he was supposed to be today at our gathering. Karen
okay.
is a very, very important professional of UFM.
Mate, I met Alan at his house many years ago.
Yeah, even
Okay.
before I
I was
left to
visiting
England.
Haifa.
Right.
When the Tantura article came out.
Right, when the Tantura.
Yeah. So,
The
but
Tantura
I'm sorry I missed it. Anyway.
Wait.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you please find your seats? We're about to begin. If you could please start with joining me in a moment of silence to honor and remember our families in Gaza who were and continue to be annihilated by Israel and Palestine today. So we can stand up in a moment of silence. Please join me. Thank you very much. After the Holocaust, it has become almost impossible to conceal large-scale crimes against humanity. Our modern communication-driven world, especially since the upsurge of electronic media, no longer allows human-made catastrophes to remain hidden from the public eye or to be denied. And yet, one such crime has been erased almost totally from the global public memory: the dispossession of the Palestinians in 1948 by Israel. This, the most formative event in the modern history of the land of Palestine, has ever since been systematically denied and is still today not recognized as a historical fact, let alone acknowledged as a crime that needs to be confronted politically as well as morally. This text that I just shared was published in 2006. It is an excerpt from the book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, by Dr. Ilan Pappe, who is of course the reason we are all gathered here tonight. 7 months into an active genocide against our families in Palestine. 7 months and 75 years. Before I introduce our esteemed guest, Dr. Pappe, and our esteemed moderator, Dr. Seikaly, I would like to welcome all of you to our event, Gaza in Context, Past, Present, and Future, organized by Nadwa Freethinking Society, in collaboration with Jewish Voice for Peace, Palestinian Youth Movement, and Peace Action Initiative. My name is Ilan Pappe, and I am a proud member of the Nadwa Freethinking Society. I'd like to thank our aforementioned collaborators, as well as the founders, board, and committee of Vintage Bay Cultural Center for all their generosity and efforts in making tonight happen. I'd like to just share a few words about Nadwa before we dive in. Nadwa Freethinking Society is a nonprofit cultural organization with no religious or political affiliations. Founded in 2019 in Dearborn, Nadwa exists to uplift and celebrate the scholarship, creativity, and diversity of our Arab American communities. Rooted in social justice, we insist on creating a safe space for open dialogue without fear of discrimination or persecution. It is our honor tonight to welcome Dr. Seikaly as the moderator for the evening, who will be in conversation with Dr. Pappe for about, up to an hour before we open it up to the audience for questions. So please note that we have 2 mics. We'll have 2 mics on each side of the room, where you can please be invited to come up and ask a question, a very brief question, like 20-second question max, to our esteemed guests. There will also be a book signing right after the event, so please stay tuned for that. Dr. Seikaly is a retired professor of history who taught at Wayne State University in the Department of Classical Languages, Literatures, and Cultures, Near Eastern Studies. Her work is focused on the social history of Arab society, specifically Palestinian and Arabian Gulf societies. Dr. Seikaly has been involved in the collection and archiving of Palestinian memory through the use of oral documentation for recording, archiving, and historicizing oral collections, including her book Haifa, Transformation of an Arab Society 1918 to 1939. She's currently working on a study of Gulf social history through the eyes of its women, and in essence, again, utilizing oral history as a major tool. I will now share Dr. Ilan Pappe's bio, who also needs no introduction. Ilan Pappe is an Israeli historian and social activist. He's a professor of history at the College of Social Sciences and International Studies at the University of Exeter in the UK. Director of the university's European Center for Palestine Studies, and co-director of the Exeter Center for Ethno-Political Studies. He's also the author of the best-selling book, Ethnic Cleansing in Palestine, History of Modern Palestine, The Modern Middle East, The Israel-Palestine Question, Forgotten Palestinians, The Idea of Israel, The History of Power and Knowledge, and the Noam Chomsky, Gaza and Crisis. Excuse me. He writes for and among others The Guardian and the London Review of Books. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ilan Pappe.
Good evening, everyone. مساء الخير لكم جميعاً. Welcome to an audience that's so diverse here in Michigan. I'm so happy to really see so many of Arab American attending this event. A community, the Arab American community, is cohesing and has shown its dedication and unity through our sense of grievance at what is happening back home. It grieves us to see the genocide going on in Palestine, but it also is very important that we here in this country are committed to our country here with definite perception of what is going back home. The venue of our gathering that is most interesting is Bint Jbeil. Bint Jbeil has a very important significance. It has an important significance to the subject of our discussion, to Palestine. The beautiful town of Bint Jbeil in the south of Lebanon is an outlet and was a first outlet to the Palestinians who were expelled from northern Palestine. It was the people of Bint Jbeil who welcomed them and opened their houses for them. They were a refuge, and that's why I give allegiance and say thank you to Bint Jbeil, the people of Bint Jbeil. Let us remember that almost 750,000 people were expelled in 1948. Our Nakba should never be forgotten. We are celebrating or commemorating our Nakba these few days. We are commemorating this week, which has created our historical legacy. Many of us, myself and my family, are survivors of that tragedy of 1948 of the Nakba, being thrown from our homes. Today, we should honor that generation. The generation give tribute to our martyrs, as we did just now, and with current events, what we are witnessing now is a recurring Nakba. It's not a one Nakba of 1948. We are living now a recurring unending Nakbas. I would love and feel very honored to bring our eminent, internationally renowned speaker, the historian Ilan Pappe, who has researched, taught, and written about the Nakba, about all our history, with all its details. Particularly, he has really given prominence to the Palestinian story. He is well known for that part that he's done. An Israeli scholar who knows the story well, who has access to our archives and their archives, and told us exactly what took place, what happened. Furthermore, he has analyzed and elaborated the system of settler colonialism that is practiced in Israel, that is part of the ethos of the state of Israel. Our speaker is one of the best known and respected writers on that system and its effects on the controlled and ruled Palestinian minorities, the minority in Israel. This system, in its application in Palestine, has fully revealed its evil impact and apartheid nature. Dr. Pappe's writing has also shown the coordinated Western dehumanization policies that the Middle East, the Middle Easterners, the Palestinians has endured, and which Israel applied and applies now intensely. I first met Ilan while we both were studying and researching the history of the Middle East and the Arab-Israeli conflict at Oxford. We were doing our advanced studies, both studying at Oxford University, studying under the direction of our advisor, Albert Hurani, at the time, learning and launching our careers influenced by his solid, thoughtful rationality and humanity, which is essential today, a humanity that is essential in our viewing, analyzing, and trying to find solutions to what is going on. In his career, Dr. Pappe and other progressive scholars represented the movement of the new historians who researched, analyzed the classical Zionist interpretations of history and questioned its validity. This led to scholarship and publications that investigated what was taken for granted, accepted on face value, which were really, in fact, pillars on which Zionism and the Israeli state was built. This scholarship, Dr. Pappe did give special attention to, particularly looking at oral tradition, oral stories, oral histories, which I gave my life to collecting. You can see my collection at Stanford University, which has been put online this week. So oral history was essential in this sort of research and work. It was a challenging period for him when he and others contested the Zionist rendition of history and its claims. However, positively, this brought a period of historical revelations and uncovering of truth, which to the Palestinians was confirmation of what they've always said. What we always said, this is what happened to us. But now, because of Ilan and people like him, it has been confirmed and affirmed. Credit is due to Dr. Pappe, who has actively exposed the conditions and results of Israeli policies on this Palestinian society and the Palestinian Arabs as a whole. In his career and relations, Ilan Pappe has been a cooperative and sensitive scholar and supporter. He had chosen the difficult path to reach justice and expose the falsehood in the history that surrounded him. Through research and oral tradition, he and his students exposed massacres. I remember hearing for the first time about the Tantura from Ilan Pappe, about the Tantura massacre, which was intensive, one of the worst, but many others too, many other massacres. And these were imposed on the Palestinians. Involving them, he also was very unusual, where he took up the Palestinian cause, like myself, and involved us in our story. For me, Ilan Pappe was a helping guide in my discovery and relinking with Haifa, my city that I studied and wrote about, the birthplace of my family. With his encouragement and urging, I returned to Haifa to tell its people the true story of their town. There, among those who remained, I had my triumphant return, the return of the daughter of Haifa to its city. It was an emotional experience. I cannot tell you how intensive that was, but it was also fulfilling and bonding. We historians of the region deeply recognize and appreciate Dr. Pappe's contributions and those like him to our field and to our resources. This revision of Zionist history has been essential for our understanding of what has happened and to find methods to rectify it and help liberate the Palestinians. A fate Dr. Pappe endorses, liberation of the Palestinians, and is one of his areas of research and future writing, as your friend Johnny told me.
That's right.
So I welcome and appreciate that my friend is here to talk to you about his experience.
Okay, good. Thank you so much, May, for your generous and humane introduction. Yes, we know each other more than 40 years. Not many friendships go back that many years. And it's not only friendship, it's also collaboration. As researcher, I think we... Oh, shall I?
We're good.
Yeah. Okay. I think that we represent really the two sides of historical research that helps us to complete the picture of what happened in 1948, but not only about what happened in 1948, but also reconstructing the Palestine that was lost before 1948 with the great hope of bringing back some of its glory, some of its beauty back in the future. And it's a great pleasure and honor to be hosted by Al-Nadwa, by the Binch Bale Center, by Jewish Voice of Peace, and everyone else who made the effort to bring me over, and I'm very happy to see you all. And I will come back to Binch Bale because I think part of what we are hoping for is really reconstructing that Palestine that was before 1948, where you could take your car, you could walk, You could cross into South Lebanon without any problem, take the train from Haifa to Beirut. This was the normal, organic Eastern Mediterranean, the Mashriq, that Zionism disrupted, destroyed, but we should never lose hope of rebuilding it for the sake of everyone who lives there, everybody who was expelled from there, and everyone who wants to come back and share with us. When the Secretary General of the United Nations reacted to the events of the 7th of October by saying that we should remember that there is an historical context for what happens on the 7th of October, whether you condemn everything that was done or partly was done, or you don't condemn, it doesn't matter. He said, you have to understand that this attack by the Hamas was not done out of context, or as he put it, it was not done in a vacuum. And immediately, as you know, he was condemned as being an anti-Semite by the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, and the government of Israel demanded that he would be dismissed as a Secretary General of the United Nations. And then followed an incredible reaction by university management in some places in Europe, some places in the United States as well, almost forbidding people to use the word context, as if this was equivalent to a slogan, killing the Jews, or something similar. The fear of being taught about the context is very indicative in the way the West, and especially the United States, has dealt over the years with the question of Palestine. So this kind of reaction by usually quite intelligent and educated people who forbid their students, their colleagues, their communities to talk about the history of Palestine, to talk about the context of Palestine when referring to the events of the 7th of October, were understood in Israel as a carte blanche to do whatever they want and exploit the events of the 7th of October to perpetrate the genocide that still goes on today, and in many ways try and complete some of the project of elimination that they were unable to complete in 1948 and ever since 1948. So I think it is important to talk about the context. And I think it is important to demand space and time to explain the context. One of the things we don't do and we shouldn't do is tell people, give me a minute or two, and in one soundbite or two soundbites, I'll explain to you why anti-Semitism is not anti-Zionism, why the Palestinians' resistance is not terrorism, why Israel is an apartheid state, and why it should be treated as an apartheid state. You cannot be content with saying these slogans if you don't have the ability to explain why these statements are valid. So you have to learn the history. You have to know that history, because what these kinds of statements represent is something that to many people's ears sound like heresy, like something that they have never heard before and contradicts everything that they have been hearing about Israel and Palestine from the mainstream media, from their politicians, from the university professors, and from the public discourse about Israel and Palestine in general. So this is very, very crucial. This is a point where our understanding of history stops being a pursuit of intellectual interest that has to do with some people who like to write about history and therefore they chose the career of historians or like to teach history. History in the case of Palestine is a crucial key for understanding what goes on today and what should happen in the future. And therefore, it is not only a matter for experts to deal with it, but everyone who is part of Palestine, feels about Palestine, wants to do something for Palestine, has to know that history because it is such an important way of explaining to others why we are doing what we are doing for the sake of the liberation of Palestine. And that history goes back more than 120 years from today. It doesn't start in 1948. And you have to be aware of the kind of intellectual, theological, ideological world in which Zionism was born to understand what's going on in Palestine today and should happen in the future. Many people do not remember or know that Zionism, to begin with, was an evangelical Christian project. Long before any Jew was thinking about Zionism, leading Christian, what we would call today Christian Zionists, in those days we would call them evangelical Christians of certain denominations on both sides of the Atlantic, were advocating the establishment of a Jewish state, knowing very well that there were other people living there, but thought that the creation of a Jewish state would precipitate the second coming of the Messiah, would bring the end of time, and eventually, in the mid-19th century, convinced the most important empire in the Middle East, Britain, that this was not just a theological good idea, but also strategically, Britain should benefit if it will make Palestine first British and Jewish. And again, these deliberations about the future of Palestine in the mid-19th century were done where people knew very well that Palestinians were already there. Not only that they were already there, but that they had a thriving society, an urban elite, a pastoral rural society, an organic human body that if you were talking about removing it or replacing it with a European Jewish state, you could only do it by force, and you could only lead to the demise of the people living there if this is your either religious idea or your strategic idea. And then it was towards the end of the First World War that these two impulses also influenced the Jewish communities, especially in Eastern Europe, that were suffering from anti-Semitism and were looking for ways of dealing with a world that did not accept them as equals. And they were convinced that maybe the best way of dealing with that kind of persecution was to build a Jewish state in Palestine. This was not a majority opinion of most of the Jews. It was a minority opinion. The religious Jews felt that this was contrary to the Jewish religion, to have a Jewish state before the end of time. Liberal Jews believed that the only way of dealing with anti-Semitism was to have a more liberal democratic world. Socialist Jews believed that the socialist revolution would make everyone equal. A small minority believed that you have to redefine Judaism as nationalism in order to solve the problem of anti-Semitism and also in order to modernize the Jewish people. A very important landmark in this transformation happened in the United States. In 1918, in Pennsylvania, the American Jewish community that until then looked very suspiciously at the whole idea of Zionism, very small minority of American Jews until 1918 thought that the idea of building a Jewish state in Palestine would solve the problem of anti-Semitism. But in 1918, under the influence of the British Zionist lobby, a new body was created, the American Jewish Congress. And that Congress adopted the idea that the British have put forward through the infamous Balfour Declaration that said that actually the West, including the United States, sees the establishment of a Jewish state as fitting the values of Western civilization. Yes, they added a condition that it would not undermine or damage the interest of what they called non-Jewish minorities, as if the Jews were the majority in Palestine in 1918. There were only 10% of the population. But they said the non-Jewish minorities, namely the indigenous native people of Palestine, that their interests would not be affected. But of course, they knew that this was the only way of establishing a Jewish state was by undermining the lives and future of the indigenous people of Palestine. This meant that with this kind of alliance that developed from the beginning of the 19th century and culminated at the end of the First World War, the alliance that faced the people of Palestine, which I'm sure most of them had no idea that such an alliance was formed. How could they know that this was happening? But by 1918, already a very powerful coalition of forces was determined to turn Palestine into a Jewish state, while most of the Jews didn't want to come to Palestine, and fully understanding the implication of such a project for the people of Palestine. This was a coalition of British policymakers, American policymakers, leaders of evangelical Christianity, and other interested strategic allies. So Palestinians from the very beginning were facing a problem that had nothing to do with them, that Europe and the United States decided should be solved at their expense, knowing pretty well that this could lead to the destruction of Palestine and the Palestinians. How could they treat the Palestinians in such a way? Well, we owe a lot to the way our dear and old and deceased late friend Edward Said helped us to understand Orientalism, the way that Europe perceived Arab people, Muslim people, Christian Arabs, even Jewish Arabs, perceiving them as less equal than the Western European or American person. So that kind of Orientalism helped to dehumanize the Palestinian to the extent that when you were discussing the project of building a Jewish state in Palestine, you didn't care at all about the position, the aspiration of the people themselves. I'm not saying that everyone in the United States or everyone in Britain or in Europe disregarded the Palestinians. There were voices that from the very beginning warned the policymakers that such a project would have disastrous consequences, not only for the people of Palestine, but for the whole relationship between the United States and Europe with the Arab world. One of them was the American consul in Jerusalem, Selah Merrill, who warned the State Department that such a a project would not only bring disaster to Palestine, but would turn the United States into the enemy of the Arab world and the Muslim world. And he was quite a prophet in that prediction. The moment this coalition enabled the Zionist project to begin building a Jewish state, once Britain occupied Palestine in 1918, the moment this became a fact, an established fact, there was an inevitable building or process that led to the 1948 Nakba. The way the British mandatory authorities, as you know, Britain ruled Palestine between 1918 and 1948 for 30 years. The way they treated the Palestinians was like they treated any colony in the empire. But they didn't treat the Jewish settlers in the same way. They allowed the Jewish settlers to build military power, economic power, political power. So Britain was very much complicit in the project, not only of building a Jewish state, but building a Jewish state at the expense of the Palestinians, first of all, at the expense of their aspirations, but as we learned, also at the expense of their existence. And today, when we expanded our scholarly interest in similar situations in the world, we found the similarities between the way European settlers treated indigenous native people, including in this country, dehumanizing them, believing they had the right to eliminate them in order to make way for creating new political entities. And the elimination of the Palestinians was motivated by the same ideologies that led to the eliminations of the Native Americans, the First Nations in Canada, the First Nation in Australia, in New Zealand, and to the way the Africans were treated by the settlers who came to South Africa. This is still a sentence that in so many places you cannot say. You cannot, and this is absurd because it's so valid, logically, morally, and historically and academically, but you cannot say that easily everywhere. You know, the Zionist movement is a settler colonial movement, and hence all its action in Palestine were motivated by what scholars of settler colonialism called the logic of the elimination of the native. And I remember when I suggested my book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, to my publisher, he said, I cannot publish a book with such a title. You cannot accuse Jewish people of committing ethnic cleansing. And I said to him, but if we don't put it in the title, the whole book is not worth it. Because that's exactly my contribution. I'm not contributing to the facts. Palestinians know exactly what happened to them. And people who don't know what happened to the Palestinians would know through my book and others. But I said to him, far more important for me, for telling what happened, is to analyze what happened, to frame what happened, to explain that this is a crime, and we know who the criminals are, and we know that they were not brought to justice, and we know that the crime continues. I wrote it in 2006. I didn't know that the crime would reach such levels of brutality as it does today. I thought that 48 was the peak of Israeli brutality. Who could have known that they would outdo their brutality in 2023, 2024? So it sounds like a very logical sentence, but I want to say that outside this hall, this is still something we are fighting for telling the truth about Palestine. And telling the truth about Palestine is not just telling what exactly happened, but also using the right language to describe what happened. So if you're talking about ethnic cleansing, you're talking about politics of elimination. And if you're talking about politics of elimination, you understand that the people who decide to eliminate another people do not treat the other people as human beings. It's dehumanization. And we had all kinds of chapters of dehumanizations in human history, including against the Jews in Europe. But it's unthinkable that in the name of what happened to the Jews in Europe, we are not allowed to talk about the inhumanity inflicted on the Palestinian by an ideological Jewish movement. We should not be afraid of doing it. I know it's not easy because we immediately would be accused of anti-Semitism by the denial of the Holocaust. But as long as we know the facts, as long as nobody could refute our both academic work and our logical work and moral work on Palestine, we should not be afraid to use the right language and not subject ourselves to the language that the American media is using to explain what's happening in Palestine. So that kind of ideology that was supported by the United States, supported by Europe, supported by evangelical Christianity, and by Jewish communities around the world, created this political and military system that waited for the right historical moment to translate the logic of eliminating the Palestinians into an actual ethnic cleansing operation. And this is where the Gaza Strip comes into our story. Gaza, until 1948, was a town, not a strip. The villages and towns around Gaza were not part of a strip. They were part of a district, sometimes the district of Bir Saba, sometimes the district of Jaffa, but they were not a strip. They were not a huge refugee camp. In fact, until 1929, there was a Jewish community as well in Gaza. In 1905, the rabbi of this Jewish community, Rabbi Azulai, and the imam of Gaza wrote together a letter to the Turkish government complaining about Zionists and Christian missionaries that try to deteriorate the relationship between Jews and Muslims who lived together in Gaza for centuries without any kind of animosity, discrimination, or racism. This was the kind of Gaza that existed until 1948. Israel created the Gaza Strip in 1948. And this is an important fact, because when Israel started the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, that, as May mentioned, ended with the expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians and the destruction of more than 500 Palestinian villages and most of the Palestinian towns, it was able to push Palestinians to the north, to Lebanon and Syria, and to push Palestinians to the east, to the West Bank and Jordan. But they were not able to push the Palestinians in the south to Egypt. Egypt refused to allow Palestinians to enter the Sinai Peninsula. So what could Israel do? He didn't want the Palestinians. So the leader of Israel, Ben-Gurion, decided we can give up a small part of Palestine in order to push hundreds of thousands of Palestinians into a strip. And you could look at the border of the strip. It's like a ruler. It's a rectangular. It's an artificial rectangular that Israel created. At first 650 square kilometers. Then the Israelis thought they were giving too much space to the refugees, and they cut it into 350 square kilometers, making it one of the densest refugee communities in the world. But the whole idea was to create, intentionally, a huge refugee camp so that demographically, the Palestinians south of Jaffa, south of Halil, would not be included in the Jewish state. And this was unfortunately done with the agreement of the Egyptian government at the time, the royal Egyptian government, because it was part of the armistice agreement between Israel and Egypt that was signed in January 1949. What is very relevant to what happens on the 7th of October is the last group of people who were pushed into the new refugee camp that Israel created in 1948 called the Gaza Strip. These were the people who lived very near the strip, but were not inside the strip. On the ruins of their villages, Israel built the very settlements that were attacked by the Hamas on the 7th of October. These were the people who were dwellers of villages that have been wiped out in the months of November, December 1948. One of them, Majdal, even continued until 1950. And I have found in the Israeli archive an order called Order Number 40 from the 25th of November 1948. And that order enlists the names of these Palestinian villages that are gone. And the order says very clearly, like so many other orders during the Nakba, occupy the villages, burn the houses, and expel the people to Gaza. So this is the first generation of the people of Gaza. Yes, of course, the young people who came into the Operation Al-Aqsa flood were third generation of refugees. But they were very much aware of the history of their grandparents and their parents. So this is the main, I think, historical context we should tell people about. But this doesn't end there, as you know. After 1948, and especially after 1967, the fate of the people who live in that huge refugee strip that Israel created is closely associated with the fate of another geopolitical unit that was created in 1948. That did not exist, people don't know it, did not exist before 1948, the West Bank. The West Bank was, it's not a term that anybody knew about before 1948. There was no West Bank. Jenin and Haifa were organically connected. Nablus and Jaffa were organically connected. Jerusalem, the hinterland of Jerusalem, were what we call today, the West Bank. It was all organically one country, one society. Family connection, tradition, aspirations, we're all part of it. Now, after 1967, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip shared a similar fate, being under a brutal Israeli occupation, ruled by a military administration that was replaced in 1981 with a civil administration which was as brutal as the military administration, violating every law we know in international law, violating every basic rights of Palestinians who live both in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and in the Gaza Strip. So whatever happened in those years since 1967, whether it happened inside the Strip or it happened in the West Bank, was a shared experience by the people of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And this experience, I don't have to tell you, I'm sure you're familiar with the repertoire of a military rule. It includes imprisoning people without trial. 1 of every 4 Palestinians has gone through this experience of being imprisoned without trial, at least for 6 months. The demolition of houses, the burning of fields, the uprooting of trees, the expulsion of people, the killing of people, the wounding of people, a daily occurrence in the life of people in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. This is also a context for a decision whether we totally appreciate it, whether we criticize some of it, or we don't criticize it, but we understand what has erupted in any kind of an anti-occupation, anti-colonization struggle. How much can people bear to be treated in such an inhuman and barbaric way? And so the 57 years of occupation are also part of the context. And then we come to the last context. And this is something I know some of you would know more, maybe some of you have even experienced it. I cannot even imagine what it means to live in the Gaza Strip since 2007. When not only they already lived since 1994, by the way, with a fence. Israel built a fence all around the Gaza Strip in 1994 already. Ironically, as part of the peace. The peace with the Palestinians led to encircling the whole of the Gaza Strip with barbed wire, with an electric fence. This is not from 2007. This is since 1994. Israel created Gaza not only as the biggest refugee camp, but as the biggest mega prison in the world. In 1994, under the conditions of peace. So you can understand what people in Gaza would feel when people tell them that they have missed an opportunity for peace by refusing to live like animals in the barbed wire that surrounded them. But then came the decision of the people in Gaza to give a chance to a different leadership to end the occupation, because the old leadership failed them, failed to deliver. It signed the Oslo Accord, which continued the occupation by other means, fragmented the Palestinian people, the oppression continued. So they gave in a democratic vote, they gave a chance for a different political leadership. Israel punished them for their decision by imposing the siege in 2007. Now, a siege is not just not allowing people to come in and come out. The siege also allowed Israel to decide what kind of food the people would get, what kind of medical infrastructure will be available for the people. This was really the whole, I would say, mentality of a prison warden that they were using towards Gaza. If we think that you are misbehaving, we will affect the number of calories that you will be able to consume. This will affect the kind of medicine that you will be able to get into the Gaza Strip. And this was going on for 17 years. And every time when the Hamas reacted by launching its rockets into Israel, or by retaliating to the way its own members were arrested or killed in the West Bank, Israel used it to bombard the Gaza Strip from the land, the air, and the sea. Now, I only once was in Jenin when an F-16 dropped a 1,000 kiloton, and this was 5 kilometers away from where I was. I still don't sleep at night remembering that bomb. Now, I'm thinking about the children of Gaza. 50% of the people in Gaza are children. 4 times being bombardment by American, by the way, aircrafts, F-16, F-35 recently. You have to understand what a bomb does, not only in terms of killing people, destroying their homes, but the trauma that remains with young people for all their life. Not to mention the fact that part of the siege is not allowing the people in Gaza to build a proper psychological infrastructure to deal with these kind of traumatic experiences. If you think about these last 17 years and the 4 assaults, so you say to yourself, the 3rd generation of Palestinian refugees in Gaza, by the way, 70% of the people in Gaza are refugees from 1948, or their 2nd or 3rd generation. If you think about this, say it's not only the load that the the young people are taking from their parents and grandparents. It's their own experience, which is not comparable to any other experience of a young person who was born, let's say, in 2000. Who else in the world who was born in 2000 knows only this kind of reality as a young girl or a young boy, and then a young man or a young girl? Who else knows this living in a maximum security prison that is being bombarded 4 times with the most lethal, cutting-edge ammunition that America provided to Israel, and not only America, if we want to be honest here, it's also Britain, Belgium, Germany in particular, who provide Israel with these bombs that are particularly built in order to inflict as much damage on the human body and psyche as possible. The most absurd thing is for Israel to claim that it's clinical in its attacks on the Gaza Strip. There's nothing clinical in dropping on a civilian space that kind of ammunition. And it's really a moment where you ask yourself, how did people have the resilience, the sumud, to continue and still believe and still resist and still continue? But let me finish by a more, I hope, hopeful note. This historical context, and of course, I was trying to squeeze in one lecture a course I'm giving for a whole year in the university. So this is really missing a lot of important pieces of the puzzle. Thank you for being patient with the history lesson, but as I said, it's an important one. But this history also tells me one important thing, which makes me hopeful. Not, I have to be honest, not for next year and not for the year after next. No, that history teaches me that the next year would be worse than this year, and the year after would be worse than the year after the next year, and the next Palestinian group that would be targeted is the other people of the West Bank. So I'm really afraid of what's going on, will go on in the West Bank in the next 2 or 3 years. Gaza is already ruined and destroyed, but they have enough energy and hate in them to continue their barbaric journey into the West Bank as well. So where does the hope, where do I see the end of the tunnel, or the dawn that I think will break after this long night that we are experiencing? It is very clear after 120 years, when I started my talk, that this coalition that decided to dehumanize the Palestinians to the extent that they could be forgotten, removed, denied, in order supposedly to solve the Western anti-Semitic attitude toward Judaism, with which the Palestinians have nothing to do. This project is crumbling, it's collapsing, it's not working. One of the reasons it's so brutal today is because it's not working. If you look at the last years of the apartheid regime in South Africa, the most brutal actions of the regime of South Africa against the Africans was in the last years of the apartheid. They are brutal because they feel that they cannot justify, even to themselves, the whole project of Zionism. The religious Jews and the secular Jews found out in the last 2 years since the election of the government in November 2022, they have nothing in common apart from hatred of the Palestinians. They also found out that the only thing they can promise their children is another 50 years of bloodshed, conflict, international isolation, and God knows how much economic survival they can maintain in such conditions. So it's collapsing from within. There is an implosion that already takes place in the Israeli society. And a lot of Israeli Jews who have the right passport, who have the right profession, are already leaving. They see no sense in staying in a place, not for their own sake, but definitely for the sake of their children and their grandchildren. Jews around the world began to understand that Zionism is not a panacea for anti-Semitism, it actually is another cause for anti-Semitism. And they begin to jettison Zionism, to distance themselves from Zionism. Yes, it's not a major trend yet, but it's growing by the day. That's why we have the Jewish Voice for Peace, and so many Jewish students take place in the protests in the university. So these are processes that each one of them by themselves will not bring an end to the Zionist project in Palestine. But there are discrete processes, and we know from history, they can fuse together to be a very powerful force that would end this project, which was wrong morally, strategically, and humanly from the very beginning. I can understand some of the impulse. My parents were saved in a way by being able to come to Palestine in 1933. Otherwise, they would have been exterminated with the rest of my family in Germany. And they were welcomed by the Palestinians when they came. They were not welcomed as invaders, as ethnic cleansers, as occupiers. They were welcomed as refugees who were looking for a safe place. And they betrayed, like everyone else in the Zionist community, they betrayed the Palestinian hosts by saying, we are abusing your hospitality and we're using it in order to uproot you and to get rid of you. And that's why so many Palestinians were surprised at what happened in 48. They had no inkling of what this group of people was planning for them and will do to them in due course. So this kind of project is not working. It's not working for a younger generation of people around the world who believe that morality and politics should go together. It doesn't work for a group of people who are now marching, who may be policymakers in the future, as a project that brings peace, because it just makes the Middle East a far more area of conflict than an area of peace. And it's very clear that this collapse will create a vacuum. And if the Palestinian national movement has its own agency here, to be prepared for that moment. Because if it would be as it is now, disunited, fragmented, it would not be able to seize the historical moment that is awaiting for them in the near future. They will not be able to take advantage of the collapse of this project. And this is not just about Palestine. This would, to mind with this I would end, and that brings me back to Binj Bail. This would lead, I believe, I don't know what May thinks about it, but I think that there's a far even greater process in the making here than Palestine. And this is rethinking about the political system that the colonialist powers, Britain and France, imposed on the Mashraq in 1916 to 1918, creating the nation states of Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Israel. These four countries in particular: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel, five states. They were built on a European model, which is called the Westphalian nation-state model. This model totally ignored people's aspiration, organic connections, normal existence, and especially coexistence. That was really characteristic of this part of the world. And we will have to bring back some of this structure back at the expense of the nation state. And it won't be that difficult because the Syrian nation state has already collapsed. Iraq is also hardly holding on as a nation state. Lebanon has its own problem. So I'm coming back to this world which I believe we will be able to build. The world where our friend's father, Johnny Mansour, from Al-Mansoura, a small village that the Israelis destroyed, really very near Binj Bail, would go every Sunday in the morning walking to bring the newspapers to the village, because that was the nearest place where you could get newspapers when you lived in the Galilee. This is the kind of world that the colonialist Europe has destroyed, and the one we will have to bring back. But I do think the first station is to get rid of Zionism and to offer equality for everyone. And despite the Congress decision, I'm calling here for all the people from the river to the sea to be free. In fact, anywhere in the world where people live between the river and the sea, they should be free. As I explained to the FBI agent who stopped me in Detroit airport, investigating me nearly for 2 hours, and he asked me, do you believe that Palestine should be free from the river to the sea? And I said, yes. And I said, and if you know that any other place which there is the river and the sea, we will make sure that these people would free as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pappe, Dr. Seikaly. Thank you for your talk, for your necessary work, for your insight, for your humor. Thank you. Another round of applause, please. I think I would like to invite you, if you have any questions for our guests, to just kind of come up here, or if you're on the other side of the room, to use the other microphone. I please also kindly ask you to be very brief with your question. And yeah, so welcome.
Good evening, and thank you. Despite the fact that the European governments and our administration, Biden administration, they declare that there is a slaughter house in our country. Now, they claim again that they are very, very powerful. In the strongest power, they support the humanity. I don't know, they claim they have like 2020 vision, let me say it this way. What happened now? They can't see nothing, are they right now? I don't know if you can say that.
No. I think maybe a few questions. Yeah? Or shall I answer one by one?
You can. If you it's easier
if it's one by one?
Yeah.
Okay. We decided I'll answer one by one. Okay. Yes, it's very difficult to understand, you know. It's on our screens, our small screens on the phones, our big screens on TV. We cannot ignore it. Nobody can ignore it. You expect at least compassion, even if you don't expect everyone to agree with your solution to the problem, at least compassion. And you don't expect people to say, oh, now that it's 10,000 people dead in Gaza, like the American Secretary of State, I think it's too many when it comes to 10,000. 9,000 is not too many people killed. I can explain it only by saying, and as I told my friend May, I've just finished a book that will come out next month called Lobbying for Zionism on Both Sides of the Atlantic. And what I realized in my book is that when you have in this country for more than 100 years a very oiled, effective lobbying, which is not just AIPAC, it's long before AIPAC. And even after AIPAC, it's not just AIPAC. If you have 100 years of lobbying, most of what is happening 50 years later is by inertia. Nobody has to call President Biden to say, I'm a Zionist president. He doesn't need a call from AIPAC to say this. This is part of the DNA of American politics, and it would blind them to the suffering of the Palestinians. So all we have to hope is that a new generation of American politicians, American policymakers, mainstream media journalists would be liberated from that kind of imposition and use their humanity and moral values to understand that this is one of the worst places where inhumanity is being hailed as democratic, civilized, and as a contribution to civilization. I'm hopeful. I think that this kind of lobbying, as powerful as it is, and it still is very powerful, like the project it supports, I can see the cracks in the building. But we should help to widen these cracks and make it fall as soon as possible. Yeah.
Thank you. Before we take our next question, I just want to remind everybody that the signing
Gaza,
after the
Professor Islan
Okay.
both signed by Dr. Pappe, just a gentle reminder. And also thank you for keeping your questions brief. We can take the next question there.
Oh, no.
Thank you. You might be familiar with the statistics survey done by the University a few months back, where only 3.2 of the Israelis said thought too much force of leaders, only 3%. And this is 4 or 5 months into the war. So, how can you, what timeline and resources do you need for such society to unlearn all of this? I don't want to use strong words, but these ideas or this hatred for the Palestinians.
Yep.
Is it even possible for their own good, forgetting the Palestinians, but how can you handle it with such animosity?
Yeah. Well, you know, rogue regimes that have support of their own societies are not changing easily just because they wake up one day and say we were wrong. You need to pressure them. You need to sanction them. You need to send them messages that they are immoral, that what they do is not accepted, and that there is a price tag to their behavior. This is not going to happen just from within. There are no dynamics of change. So the statistics you quoted are a very fair reflection of the way Israelis treat Palestinians in general. No compassion whatsoever, and this is not surprising. But we have to look at history. Societies that we thought would never change have changed. I remember going to South Africa in 2014. Every white person I met told me that he or she were against apartheid. I said, well, you all were against apartheid. Why did it take so long to bring it down? But I don't mind at all for people in 20 years from now would say, I was never a Zionist, which is fine. So I think that we should analyze it correctly. If people say to us, let's wait for a peace camp in Israel to bring an end to the violence, we should say, no, there's no way that this peace camp will ever be a factor. So let's go for the BDS. Let's go for the boycott. Let's go for the divestment. Let's go for sanctions.
My question actually was similar to the one previous, so maybe just tell us more about how we can imagine the future. When I used to think about a one-state solution, I was thinking of people, like you, and many of Jews of conscience that I have worked with and known. They gave me the hope of a future, of a possible future. How can one come now, after the genocide, how can this future is possible? What I realize is that someone like you is not only exceptional, but also an exception. How can someone come back from genocide that is supported by so much of Israeli society, the majority of them? They know it, they see it, and they so just like that point is how can is this a redeemable? So is it now become as sum game? Why can't it not be?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I'll tell you one thing is very clear for me. It's up now to the Palestinian National Movement to tell us what is their vision for the future. And they should tell us, which we have not heard from them because they were not consulted since the so-called peace process began by the Americans. What is the Palestinian vision for the future? The consensual Palestinian vision for the future. How do the Palestinians see the Jews in that future? Regardless, and you have the absolute right to say the future for me also is about justice. And I would like to bring people who were criminals to justice. Everything, doesn't matter. I'm not going to speak for you. You have to say this to me. And then you don't have to care about the question that you've raised, because either there will be Jews who accept it and would say this is the kind of homeland we would like to share with the Palestinians, or they would say, like quite a few whites said in South Africa, I don't want to live without these privileges, or I'm afraid about revenge, or whatever. This is not your concern. Your concern, to my mind, is to say clearly, which Palestinians have not said clearly. What is the vision? What is the vision? And lead the way to that vision. To that, yes, I know a lot of Israeli Jews would say, if this is the case, I'm leaving. تفضلوا. يلا. Okay.
I'm probably tired of you by now, but thank you for all your questions, by the way. If you do feel like the question has been asked, please don't take the time to ask it again. There's many of you, and we do have a short time, so let's please be mindful of everybody's time. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you.
I want to raise the point that Biden has said pushing the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism that's taken office in 2020. This career has been unwaveringly supportive of Zionism. The United States has been setting billions of dollars for making Zionist entity annually for decades prior to Biden. Israel is the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. foreign aid. Since October, Biden has been taking emergency measures to send hundreds of arms transfers to Israel that fall below the congressional review threshold. He has been pressing Congress to approve tens of billions of dollars in fighter jets, and just recently he has come out saying that he may, quote-unquote, condition aid to Israel on the basis of their actions abroad. You talk about the lack of social cohesion in Israel and suggest that internal contradictions may undo the regime. Could you talk more about the strategic interests that Britain had in Israel and the Middle East, North Africa region during the mandate period, and to what extent is the United States complicity in and material support of and investment in the genocide there today, a continuation of those same interests? Might these strategic interests be root which holds together the Zionist state despite internal chaos, which keeps the liberation of Palestine in reality?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I think part of the answer you gave in your own question, which is good, which shows me that you know your history, which is great. I think that Palestine played a role in Britain's strategy in two ways. One was, as I said, after towards the end of the First World War, Britain was still in an imperial mood, and they thought that the collapse of the Ottoman Empire would enable it to get new possessions. And so they looked at Zionism as one way of getting Palestine, but they were also interested in other parts. They just had to share the spoils with France and Italy. So that's one thing. The second one, there was a similar British lobby, pro-Zionist, pro-Israeli lobby in Britain as there was in the United States. The point is that from, I would say, probably 1950, Britain is not that important anymore. So it doesn't matter that much what the British policy is. What matters is the American policy. I'm interested in British policy because I teach in Britain, and I can see the same DNA in British politicians that immediately are obeying Israel over the years. But the important thing is really the United States. From I would say, probably the end of the Kennedy administration, up to the end of the Kennedy administration, there were still reasonable voices, not all of them pro-Palestinian necessarily, but people who understood the Arab world better. And you had a feeling that there are alternatives at least discussed by the Americans. This ended with Johnson. And from that moment onwards, America became the main diplomatic, military, and financial shield of Israel. But the good question is, you know, for the Americans, do they know what they are supporting? Do they know what they are financing? Do they know what they are funding? And hopefully we are hearing, and we're very encouraged by the young Americans who seem to know what it's being funded and seem to know what they should do against this kind of funding. And they're using every democratic means at their disposal to show courageously what they think about that policy, and we should hope that larger sections of the American society would follow them. Yeah.
Thank you. Again, please keep your questions very, very brief, up to 20 seconds, less is even better, please. So, next question.
Hi, Dr. Pappe. I'm at the University of Michigan. It's more than a pleasure for me to be standing here in front of you. You've been a great inspiration for me and many others alike. Fortunately, or rather unfortunately, you have gave legitimacy to the facts that we all need, but give a voice to them, you become our voice. Not only did I engage with your book, but many of my friends who are here today. I'm very happy that I'm standing here. I have one brief comment, one brief question. So the comment is that I think we need a book on the topic of the weaponization of anti-Semitism by someone like you that will become a masterpiece in the field. Second, the question is, as you mentioned, the public opinions all changing within this country and across the world. But we need a number of years. How many years till the downfall of this disgusting project? We're looking for a lot of dawn, after this long night. So a number of years.
Let's see. Good. You know, one thing about what of these processes that are happening is that nobody should, in this room, consider themselves observers of these processes. We're not just onlookers. We are part of these processes. So the timing depends on you as much as depends on other maybe events that you have no power over them. But it depends on us, wherever we are and whoever we are in this great struggle for justice. So I would say that rather than giving, a timeline even, I would think that this is the kind of discussion we should have now. And the discussion can be very intimidating to a lot of people, but I don't think it should be. I mean, that's my point. When I even talk with Israelis, I'm telling them, it's up to you to make sure that this collapse is not necessarily bad for you either. If you understand history, if you understand the win-win situation it brings with it. So I want it to be the conversation. I'm not bringing down a state by myself. I'm not judging the state's right for exist. No state, for my mind, has much right to exist anyway. It is an inevitable development that's happening. And I just want to make sure with everyone else that it's benefiting, especially the victims of that situation, and creating hope for everyone. As I said, not only for Palestine. I think there's a lot of people in Syria who would like to hear about a timeline of hope. There are many people in Iraq, there are many people in Lebanon who want to know what there's a better future for them. So I think this is the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Pappe, I'm so very grateful that you're here with us tonight. Our question is, can you define the term Semitism for us from a historical context and also how it's used commonly today? And can you describe for us who is considered Semitic and why it only applies today to the Jewish people?
Yeah, definitely. Well, academically, you're absolutely right. Semitic people include a lot of people who are Arabs and a lot of Jews who are not Semitic. Jews who came from Poland are not Semitic. It has a lot to do with the origins of hatred of Jews that led to this use or abuse, if you want, of the term Semitic, which comes from the Old Testament. Shem, one of the sons of Noah. And evangelical Christians, also Catholic Christians, at the height of the church's power in Europe, were calling the Jews the sons of Shem, or the Semites. They didn't care very much whether this was historically or academically correct. And that became generic. But I think you're absolutely right. It's good to unpack it and to explain to people the origins of it, that this was not out of the correct definition of an ethnicity or an origin or identity, that this was part of a hate crime, if you want, an old one, hate speech and hate crime. And that's how it became such a kind of common reference to the hatred of Jews, which anyways now should be reconsidered, because so much of it is weaponized by Israel and its supporters to silence us. Right. So I think that it's a good question, and it's a good part of that history lesson that I think we should ask people to listen to us when they claim that we are anti-Semites, or in my case, self-hating Jew. Doesn't matter. Yeah.
Just a reminder, we have 10 more minutes for Q&A, so.
The conflict in the Middle East is, in American media, portrayed as a conflict between Jews and Arabs, which of course is a racist lie. You had about 30 miles from here in Dundee, Michigan last month, you had an American congressman representing that area actually call directly in the speech he gave for the use of, he called it, he referred to it as a Hiroshima solution in Gaza. And I agree completely with the fact that you claim this is not Jews against Arabs, this is imperialism, in which Zionism is a tool for the British and now American imperialism against the oppressed populations of the global South. In your book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, that's the most important book I've read in the last 20 years. I learned about the Circassians. In the news, they talked about the Armenians in Jerusalem. These were actually the first refugees of genocide. And, you know, if you could comment on that, the fact that these are the refugees of genocide before the Jewish population, and the Zionists today, well, in 1948, they cleansed the Circassians, and today they're cleansing the Armenians.
Yeah, definitely. The genocide of the Jews in 1948, in the Second World War was not the first genocide. Yes, I think what the Turks did to the Armenians is definitely a genocidal action. What the Germans, by the way, did in Namibia was also genocidal. Belgium genocided millions of Africans in Congo in the 1830s. The Italians genocided 150,000 Libyans before the First World War. The West tries to give us its own definition of genocide when it suits its interests. But we should insist of reclaiming this whole conversation. We will decide what is a crime against humanity, and we can see that the International Court of Justice is now listening to us, finally, after years of ignoring what Stuart Hall rightly called the West and the rest. So the rest is back, and the rest will teach also the West that if you talk about universal values, they're not necessarily the American values, they are the values of millions and millions of people in the world who were unjustly treated throughout the centuries.
Professor Pappe, well, why, in your opinion, do we see unwavering support to people like Netanyahu living here in a right-wing extremist government from media establishments, political establishments, not just in the United States, but I understand that Israel lobbying in the U.S., and Christian Zionism is a U.S. state of role in that, but why do we see it across Western countries, even to the point where it could jeopardize somebody's political career and reputation? Thank you.
Do you understand the question? Can you repeat slowly the question? I'm sorry.
Sure. 1 second. Why is the unwavering support for a right-wing extremist government that's carrying out genocide by Western governments?
You mean beyond the United States?
Beyond
in
the
Europe?
United States,
Okay.
I know we have the Israel lobby, I know that they have that in America as well.
Okay, I think good question. Well, I think there is some sort of a global Israel here that we should be aware of. By global Israel, I mean that Israel relies on a certain alliances of forces. It includes fascist parties in Europe, neo-right parties in Europe. It includes Islamophobic movements in the West. It includes unethical regimes in the global South, including in the Arab world, who don't mind normalizing their relationship with Israel. And I think it includes also multi-corporations, security companies, military industries. We have to understand this is a very powerful coalition. It's not the same powerful coalition that allowed Zionism to emerge, but it's a powerful coalition that until recently allowed Israel to ignore what one can call global Palestine, which is the way most people in the civil society treat morality, justice, and so on, have seen Palestine as epitomizing their own struggle for justice. So I think we have here a conflict that Israel and Palestine are just epitomizing the symptoms of this conflict. This is a conflict about politics in the world. What is politics? Who are the people who decide what is our agenda about ecology, about poverty, about moral foreign policy, the way we spend the money? This is all connected. This is totally connected. But Palestine symbolizes the hopes of people for a different agenda. Israel symbolizes the power of people to prevent a more hopeful agenda to emerge.
Dr. Pappe, I'm concerned about the university students' protests for Palestine on campus. I understand that there is a fear that the University of Michigan encampment will be suspended. This is a fear that has not happened yet. I haven't heard. Please say a word about the importance of this.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. It's very concerning because universities all around the world are made of two components. University is both a business and management on the one hand, and a community of scholars and students on the other. And as community of scholars and students, universities in this country, by and large, understand where they stand. Managements are less clear about their moral standing and are likely to use force to make their will be imposed on the students. The only thing I can say is that this is a long struggle. It's not a new struggle. And there are ups and downs in these struggles. And actually, unfortunately, when brutality is used, when power is used, it means that something good is happening. And we learned it. I mean, I've been an activist for more than 50 years. I know it. I know it that when we started the BDS campaign, nobody paid attention to us. Nobody legislated against us. It was not illegal to talk about it. Now I can be arrested in certain countries for saying this. I would be denied entry to others. And I think it's a good sign. It's a good sign. I don't want to pay the price, but it's a good sign. So these students, in fact, if these students' demonstrations would have passed peacefully, without any reaction from the campuses, it would have meant that they didn't matter that much. So I think they should be proud that the only way to silence them is to use force and power.
There was just a few seconds to say something in relation to what we just talked about real quick.
Salam everyone. Actually, the team on campus at the encampment is asking for assistance. So if after the event anyone is interested to go to University of Michigan Ann Arbor, we are facing some difficulties this evening by the police, so they're asking for help and support on campus for the students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pappe, for your talk today. My question to you is on to respond to your statement about for Israel, the power position that you described, and your statement of conviction that Palestinian leadership needs to be listened to. I'm interested in that conflict community. As you said, the coalition is very powerful. It's multi-tentacle, right? So how can we help Palestinian people to be able to disengage Palestinian leadership from that global Israel, as you described, to be able to have that moral voice that would truly represent the Palestinian people's aspirations and not be corrupted? How do you decontaminate, if you like? I'm interested in more about that.
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of faith in the young Palestinian generation. I don't know if you know, but the Palestinians are considered to be one of the youngest societies in the world. I mean, that's Palestinians in general, wherever they are one of the youngest in terms of percentage of how many are under the age of 18. And when I hear this young generation, and probably also because of the internet, they can transcend boundaries that an older generation found difficult to transcend, geographical boundaries, physical boundaries, after the fragmentation of the Palestinian people. They seem to speak in much more unison and unity than the older generation. And I think that they are building for us a clearer, united vision. I think they have a problem with organization. We've seen it also in the so-called Arab Spring, of building the structure and so on. They dispense too easily, I think, with ideas such as movements and parties and so on. But there is a very positive energy there. So I'm hopeful that this could be happening very soon. I don't think the present generation, whoever sees themselves Palestinian politicians, I don't know exactly where they are able to do that. I don't think they can. I don't think we should ask the people of Gaza to strategize now. They're trying to survive. I don't think you'll hear a strategy from the people in West Bank either. This is, by the way, where I think, and I've said it many times to my friends among the 48 Arabs, this is the Palestinian minority in Israel, almost 2 million people, very important section, usually forgotten and misunderstood in the Arab world. I think they have a crucial role to play, but they have to make a strategic decision. They thought they can play both in the Israeli political field and the Palestinian political field. They need to decide if they want to make an an impact. They have to play only in the Palestinian political field, because anyway, playing in the Israeli political field has brought them no dividends and only helped Israel to beautify its image in the outside. Much more to say.
Imam Mujahid in the United States. I'm a student of the great Imam of America, Imam Wafiddin Muhammad. And I come to give you our blessing, permission to also, when we talk about the atrocities and dehumanization, feel free, 100%, to include the African American story. Because in the Zionism and the evangelical Christian movements, you have to remember, our extended more than 120 years, because if you go back to about 135 years, you find that 7 of the great evangelical Christian movements lost their slaves in the plantations. Although they were well paid to develop the slaves, they created this religious circle. And while there were invisible hands besides Britain behind the concept of white supremacy, remember, the African American chose the Palestinian flag and took out the white supremacy and kept the other colors as our flag. Because the Palestinian story is the human story. And we salute you enough to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for that great talk. I was reflecting on the comments made about the cracks that are showing up in the Israeli state, in Zionism, the problems happening, also this history of Jews taking a different path when confronted with oppression and becoming socialists, anarchists, unionists. Can you comment on what's the state of the left in Israel? Do they have a role to play in wedging into those tracks and encouraging the state to come?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the really genuine anti-Zionist left in Israel is very small, but it exists. I should say it exists. And I suppose that if other processes we've described will continue and intensify, hopefully their message will become a little bit more attractive to others. They have a role to play. Everybody has a role to play. I don't think you play a role according to the outcome of what you do. You play a role according to the effort and risk you're willing to take. And I think that's very important. The importance is not so much that they're going to change the Israeli political opinion, but it's important for history to know that there were, our friends from Gaza asked about how can you live with people who committed genocide. It's good to know that at least a small number, a very small number, but at least it was there, who did not share this mentality and this ideology. It will be important for the reconciliation. It will be important. People would remember that there are also other voices, as insignificant and small as they are today. Again, I come to the Palestinians minority in Israel. They're probably the only Palestinians who know some of the Israelis who are not settlers and not soldiers as well. And I think this would be important because, Frantz Fanon taught us that decolonization that is built only on violence and revenge doesn't create a better regime.
No.
And we want, so many people's hope are kind of focused on Palestine because it has not become yet a state. So we all have these hopes that it will be something different. It will not be another Arab regime. It will not be another African state. It will not be another failed decolonized project. We have these great hopes. And I feel that these are justified hopes. And therefore, I also think these voices are important. Very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I see Audrey coming up for questions, but we actually do have to leave the room in literally 5 minutes. So we're going to have to wrap it up with a couple more questions, and I will invite you for the book signing at 8:30. Thank you.
That was a lot of questions. Next question. Thank you for being here. As an academic, with your long experience in this struggle, what do you think the most effective methods have been over your experience? For management, for impact on campuses, what do you advise?
Well, first of all, I think that it's very important to remember that in the end of the day, there is a process that goes from academic research to school books, to curriculum, to the media, and so on. And I think one of the greatest revolution we still need to have is that campuses in America will not only see demonstration, but the classroom will teach about Palestine as a colonialist project, the Palestinian movement is anti-colonialist project. We still have a long way to go there. And I think that that's the role of academics, apart from, of course, the wonderful work that students are doing. So we need the production of knowledge, which is relevant to what goes on. And as you know, academic courage sometimes is an oxymoron. So we want our academics to be more courageous than they are. They're not courageous enough. And they think that they have no influence. That's their excuse. But it's not true. It's not true. They have a lot to contribute to that kind of struggle.
When my grandfather and my father and Felix fled from our business in 1948 to April, they could not imagine that a military state would be built upon them so quickly. Yesterday, I heard from a person who is a blogger who can read comments in the Israeli press that there are a group of Syrians going to Jews in Galilee who are planning a petition to secede from Israel. Have you heard this? Is it possible that can happen?
No, I'm sorry, I haven't heard about this, but I will check it. It's everything is possible nowadays in Israel. So I'm not saying it's not true, but I haven't heard about it. So, but it's possible. I mean, yeah, they're trying everything. So we'll see. But I'll check it. I'll come back to you. I don't know about this. Sorry. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I think we're at time. I'm going to have to invite everybody, please. Whoever still has questions, you can still ask Dr. Pappe outside. But we are going to open up for a book signing. Dr. Pappe, please make a talk. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Blanya.
Hassan, Ilan, thank you for coming.
Yes, sir.